This is my Unit 4 article summary presentation. In this presentation, I will talk about an article by Deborah C. Poff entitled Ethical Leadership and Global Citizenship, Considerations for a Just and Sustainable Future. Poff says it's evident what it will take to achieve a socially and economically just global society. So the problem isn't knowledge, it isn't what to do. The problem is actually the willpower to act in this ethically just way. Poff cites Deepak Chopra as saying that people need to stop viewing themselves as consumers but need to define themselves in terms of relationships, that we're relational beings, that we're not defined by what we can consume but we're defined by our relationships. This seems to be pretty self-evident, but Poff says the fact that this even needs to be stated is proof that there's a deep distortion in our thinking about what the purpose of life is. And we've begun to think that the purpose of life is what we can consume or what we can attain. And so there's a real deep distortion there. Poff says that the lifestyle that we have become accustomed to here in the United States cannot be attained by population-rich countries like China and India. And she says that it's actually not even sustainable for the countries who have been able to attain it. In the future, that will be unsustainable for them as well. And what this will lead to is a lack of social, economic, and environmental justice for the majority of the Earth's population currently and for all future generations. So the corporate scandals of Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco, they demonstrate the fact that there really is no ethical voice to indicate when enough is enough. When have we attained too much? When have we consumed too much? Or when enough is actually too much and has become a negative. So given that our values drive our actions, we need to develop a values-based leadership model. Sulia, so Poff cites Sulia, saying that ethics are the heart of leadership, and says that any moral values are essential to good leadership. Essentially what Poff and Sulia are saying is that we can no longer view good leadership as simply effective or productive leadership. But anything that we term as good leadership must also be ethical. So it must be moral leadership as well as effective and productive leadership in order for us to call it good leadership. So earlier ethics literature really tied business development. They tried to tie ethics to business development, which really proved to be lacking, because if ethical business was not profitable, then really where was the motivation to be ethical? But ethical studies and literature have really begun to focus on leadership as the basis for creating moral business practices. So how are we going to develop this in our society? So Poff says there's several things that we need to do in order to develop a society that's economically and environmentally moral and just. And she says individual leaders must have an internal drive and commitment to morality. And really the only way to help leaders develop this is through education. And so the majority of the weight of this is going to fall on our education system, our universities, to teach moral leadership. So moral education, what Poff says, needs to not only be taught in disciplines of leadership, but it needs to become the core part of the educational model for all universities. She says that Poff says that one of the problems is the rise of global corporations. They're no longer anchored in communities, which help create some accountability, but they're global. And so therefore we must develop a universal standard, a global standard for morality. And Poff says that scholars working in the area of transformational leadership and servant leadership offer the most promise because those leadership theories are tied closely to ethics, and ethics and morality are very much a part of those leadership models. So any leadership theory that includes competence and effectiveness must also include values such as honesty, trustworthiness, service to the organization, and integrity. Poff's answer to the economic problems of the world is to reorient our worldview from human beings as consumers to human beings as relational beings. And she says we must educate our leaders on the value and necessity of moral leadership. We have to propagate a worldview that values sustainability and global justice. So as you can see, like Poff says at the beginning of the article, it's not hard to know what to do, but as we look at those things, obviously it's easier said than done. With the fact that we have global corporations and the fact that we need to come up with a global idea of what is ethical and moral is a challenge in and of itself. And then developing leaders who have a drive deep within that no matter what it looks like for their businesses, that decisions must be made in an ethical and moral way is also a big challenge. So great article. She makes great points, and I really agree with where she's going, but the challenge is big.